So without any further ado, I am completely delighted to turn to our guest today on the surgery, Professor John Gilliland, who we have learned so much from at Leaf and really value our relationship with. John, I won't give you a huge introduction because Will's already done that, but needless to say, you've been working for a long time in that space, in the universities, in that space of research, and particularly focusing on carbon. And it's really exciting to hear what you're doing today with the ARCZero project, and wider than that. So I'm sure you'll be keen to tell us and keep the discussion very wide and open. So, John, I'd love to start by asking to hear a little bit about the ARCZero project, if that's okay. It's a farmer-led network. It's looking at the use of advice, looking at metrics, looking at data, and I know you're digging very deep and looking very much at that science-based approach, and really building some of those solutions that we need. So it would be great to hear a little bit more about that, if that's okay.
So, well, Claire, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me along, and also blown away to see the number of people who've actually joined this call. So I hope I don't waste the next 3/4 of an hour on the call with people. Where do I come from? Well, I was very privileged. I inherited a farm back in 1987. I'm a graduate of Edinburgh through the what was then the Scottish Agricultural College system. And I've always had a fascination. I'm not a scientist or an academic. I'm a practitioner that understands the output of science. And I've gone on a journey, and now others have come with me on the journey. I mean, my first start in this journey was on my own farm. When I came back from college, one of the things I inherited was a 15,000 square foot Georgian house, whose oil-fired boiler packed up in 1988. And if you live in the northwest of Ireland with 52 inches of rainfall, actually, you don't heat your house to keep it warm, you heat your house to keep it dry. And so I had to find an answer. And in 1988, I put a huge straw and timber-fired boiler into my house, and it paid for itself in 4 years. Now, nobody was talking about carbon then, nobody was talking about renewable heat incentives. But what it actually showed me that, slightly lateral thinking could actually give you a result. And I did it purely for economics and nothing else. And it just made economic sense. My main driver these days, apart from being a grandfather for gorgeous grandchildren, which does actually focus my attention, is I really struggle with how society portray our sector. And I feel that we are really been undermined, mainly because we don't have robust data that we can talk about our journey with integrity. And so really what I wanted to do was, could I put the metrics around? A lot of you may not be aware, for 7 years, I chaired DEFRA's Rural Climate Change Forum from 2005 to 2012. And actually the last policy recommendation we made before we were disbanded was that we should create a whole farm carbon balance sheet. Farmers have liabilities, that's their greenhouse gas emissions. Farmers have assets, that's their carbon stocks, and maybe whatever additionality. But we wanted to be able to count them. I was told you never could count them. It would never happen. And actually, we use a phrase in Northern Ireland here called being thran. In other words, awkward. I was determined, when I was told you would never count them, we'd find a way of counting them. So it's become like a personal vendetta. I then joined a company called Devonish, a livestock nutrition company based in Belfast. They bought a farm of land in County Meath in the Republic of Ireland called Douth. And we found a way of doing it, courtesy of archaeologists. And we use digital survey technologies from air called LiDAR that allowed us to measure all the carbon in our trees and hedges. It also allowed us to do other wins, like where's our heritage, like how does water run off our farm and actually pollute our waterways, create runoff risk maps. So when the opportunity came, literally a week into lockdown, our Department of Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs in Northern Ireland, DERA, announced an EIP Agri competition. A group of us learnt how to use Zoom in a hurry. And we decided to bid into this competition to see could we secure some money and actually put our money where our mouth is and have a go at it. And, you know, it's not until you actually take the gloves off and put clay under your fingernails and do something, do you actually find the true journey. And it's not always what it's made out to be. So rightly or wrongly, 6 other farmers joined me on a journey. My own farm, Brookhall, chairs it as such. And we're just coming to end of 2.5 years. The project itself was about putting baselines in. We believe if you can't measure, you can't manage. And that isn't just about putting everyone through. We used SAC's AgriCalc, so we've all been through a life cycle assessment calculator. And in fact, we're all going back through it again now 2 years later to see can we pick up change. But we did a LiDAR survey, we did a precision soil sampling and analysis survey on our fertility. And now we've done 2 full carbon soil carbon samples, and I believe that we've probably found the solution that we like of measuring soil carbon down to the sea horizon or a meter, whatever comes first. And we've had our first look-see last September. We found 36% of our carbon was deeper than 30 centimeters, which just blew our minds. So really what we wanted to do was create that data set to create what I call a carbon asset register on the farm. So our carbon asset register has what's all our carbon in our hedges, what heights are they, carbon in our trees, are they single, are they woodlands, is it deciduous, is it coniferous? So we work all that out. And then we work out what our carbon is in our soils. And the hope is that we come back every 5 years and we measure change. But it is done robustly. So on my farm, I've now uncovered that I manage on an annual basis 25,500 tons of carbon dioxide equivalents. I'm hoping when I come back in 5 years' time, that might be 27,000 tons. But I've not got a figure around it. I've not got a metric, I've got a figure, I've got a methodology, and I'm focused. Okay, so what can I do? Can I look at multi-species swards? Can I put more trees in? Can I put more hedges in? What can I do to build up my carbon stocks? At the same time, what can I do to reduce our emissions? So alongside that then is very much an outreach. So we've had 4 very successful farm walks last year. We've got 3 to hold this year. And we've had really positive feedback surveys coming from them. A lot of interest, a lot of people very tentative, acutely aware. I mean, Northern Ireland only put its Climate Change Act in place last year. So a lot of publicity. What does this mean I need to do? Okay, so a lot of people just coming, dipping their toe in the water, getting a feel for it. But the feedback has been extraordinary, and nothing beats peer-to-peer learning. The best ambassadors on the day are the host farmers. And, you know, and it's been an extraordinary journey. I am indebted to my 6 other fellow farmers who put their faith in me in this journey. It has been uncomfortable for a lot of us. You know, doing a life cycle assessment calculator, you need to put a lot of data in. You have to go and scratch your head, where do I get all this data from? But you know something, it's been very refreshing. It's been quite rewarding. And most importantly, it has empowered each one of us with really good quality data that is allowing us to make better quality decisions on the journey ahead. So actually, I will argue it's inspired us through the empowerment of this really good data, which is personalized to our own businesses. It's not about the catchment, it's not about the region, it's about our own business. And so each farmer now knows not just their gross emissions, but their net carbon position. And every one of us is in a different part of that journey. And we range from, you know, 25% of the way there up to one of us is 5% beyond net zero today. And that's an extraordinary expose. And I would greatly encourage people, if you get the chance and you're offered the chance to go on this journey, please do.
Thank you, John. That's brilliant. And I love there how you've articulated that, you know, it starts with that baselining and having that methodology, that action plan, and then measuring. But actually, a lot of the power also sits in that peer-to-peer learning, which is, yeah, really important. And, you know, we're huge advocates of it at Leaf ourselves. So that's really great. And viewing it as a journey and breaking down the parts is really fascinating. Sorry, I'll just turn my camera off again so it doesn't distract everybody. So that's brilliant. So can we move on from there then? It'd be great to understand what your thoughts are on what your interpretation of what net zero actually is. Do we need offsetting to reach that net zero? Could we ever reach that absolute net zero on a global scale? If we could unpack that a little bit, John, that would be great. Thank you.
Claire, there's a lot in that. That's a collection of questions. But anyway, let's have a go at it. So first of all, what is my definition of net zero? And I'm going to articulate it, and then you can shoot me. Okay. My view is the majority of society doesn't understand what net zero means. So what does it mean to me in my farm business? Well, it means that I'm going to try and reduce my greenhouse gas emissions down a bit. Okay. I'm going to build my carbon stocks up a bit. I'm going to incorporate some renewables to displace any purchased brown energy with green energy. And I'm going to look at things like waste management technologies to try and reduce the emissions from waste, try and minimize waste in the first place, but reduce emissions from waste. And when you average those together, net zero is when all of those equal zero. It is not the way that either the Dutch or the Irish are interpreting it. The Irish are interpreting it as they want to see net zero on what we call the agriculture, forestry and land management sector, and are not recognizing land use change, land use and forestry. They're not recognizing the role of renewables on a farm, and they're not recognizing the role of anaerobic digestion on a farm. And so for me, net zero is about using all the tools in the toolbox and not some of the tools in the toolbox. The view of net zero by 2050 is, for me, what that means. It is the mean, the average of the industry will get to net zero, which means that some farmers will never get there and some farmers will go way past it. Okay. And to allow us to get to net zero, we will have to have some mechanism that farmers who don't want to get there do have to accept the carbon cost of not getting there. And some that go way beyond it do get recognized for the carbon benefit they're giving. And we need some mechanism around that to do that. I'm very selfish on this. I'm very focused about farming and the land-based sector. I am not a fan of selling carbon credits and giving it to Ryanair or to whoever, okay? Because all we do is we help bring their national infantry down and we get no recognition of it. And we are still seen as the pariahs of society. So I'm very selfish here. I'm putting agriculture and land management into the fore first. So in regards to offsets and insets, can I talk about insets first? So insets for me is where I can use my bit of renewables. So if I'm a dairy farmer and I put PV panels on top of my milk parlor and I displace the brown electricity from the grid with my green electricity, I am allowed to use that as an inset within my business. I'm absolutely for that. And it's ring fenced within the business. It's easily auditable. It's transparent and it has integrity. And I am very active with governments at the moment to ask for an additional mechanism to the greenhouse gas national inventory, which would allow a netting across within a business of the different vertical silos in the greenhouse gas national inventory. Only 2 days ago, I presented in Brussels at the European Dairy Association with the Commission. I presented in the United Nations before Christmas, and I've consistently know my views on this, and so did DERA. I'm very focused on this concept of net carbon for a farm, not gross carbon. In regards to offsets, my own view is we should put our sector first. And I'm acutely aware, someone I absolutely admire and spoke very vocally at the Oxford Farming Conference this year and last year, Jeremy Moody from the Central Association of Agricultural Valuers. And Jeremy was very clear, be wary of selling your carbon credits too soon. You may need it within your own business to look at getting your own business in place before you go and give the crown jewels to someone else for a tiddly little fee. So, I'm very passionate about that, and I think I would argue and urge people before they start selling the crown jewels is look very carefully what you need yourself. Put your own house in order first before you go outside the business. Have I missed something, Claire? You're looking at me.
Sorry, I'm having a little bit of a malfunction. No, that was wonderful. Thank you so much, John. And I really like that idea that yeah, not selling carbon credits too soon is, I think, really good advice, because like you say, at some point in the future, you don't know when you're going to need that and possibly have to look at more expensive solutions to then cover your own carbon. So there's a lot of sense in that.
And Claire, it's really important that people understand there are two carbon prices already out there. There is the statutory or regulatory market that sits within the emissions trading scheme, and that's anywhere from 70 to 100 pounds. And then there's the voluntary carbon market, which is between 5 and 15 pounds a tonne. And I live beside a coal-fired power station, and it really galls me that that coal-fired power station, if it puts less coal in it and therefore less emissions out, it gets 70 to 100 pounds a tonne. If I work my backside and I build more carbon credits up, I am lucky if I get 15 pounds a tonne if I went into that marketplace. That isn't fair. What I absolutely want to bring is transparency and empower land managers and farmers to know their business so that they become strong decision makers and don't take a fiddler's fee.
Great. That's a really interesting view. And I really like your principle there in terms of, dare I say it, almost looking at that enterprise stacking where, you know, you've got a milk parlour and you put your renewable energy on top of the milk parlour. Actually, that's beginning to look at how you can do that, you know, approach that enterprise stacking as well. So really, really interesting and fascinating. Thank you. I'd love to know how you would recommend farmers to take their first steps on this journey, John. And I'm sure the answer will be, you know, it's different for every farm, but are there any kind of general first steps?
I mean, we have had a lot of engagement around ARCZero. A lot of farmers have come. Now, the 7 of us in ARCZero have been very privileged. We secured £120,000 from DERA, which has really helped. Now, we have matched it as farmers. We put another 80,000 in there too, because once we got into it, our ambition got bigger and bolder, okay? And we wanted to know more. So actually it's delivered. It's leveraged private sector funding into it as well. So certainly I'm absolutely aware that LEAF has now started their own journey as such. You know, when you get an opportunity, please take the opportunity. My encouragement, but not only should you maybe look at going through a life cycle assessment calculator, but you actually do want to start taking baselines of your soil organic carbon, baselines of your carbon in your trees and hedges. Because actually we have a problem out there is carbon sequestration is the poor brethren. Nobody wants to talk about carbon sequestration. All want to talk about emissions reduction, okay? And so we are using predominantly a tier 1 sequestration factor. That means we're averaged with everybody else in the world. A tree is a tree is a tree. Now I know, first of all, different species grow at different rates. Different soils allow trees to grow at different rates. And actually, the only way you get that accuracy is to move the dial from tier 1 to tier 2 to tier 3. So at the moment, what we're doing is we're using a tier 1 calculator that AgriCalc are providing. But we're doing our baselines with the intention we will come back 5 years' time, do our baselines again. And the difference will help us get a tier 3 sequestration factor. So that's the goal at the end of the day. So one of the things I'm doing as a policy advocate is encouraging governments to help us. So in Northern Ireland, most people aren't aware, Northern Ireland is now baselining every tree, hedge and field in the country. It's a £45 million investment, courtesy of our Department of Agriculture. It's not just about our journey to zero, it's also about improving water quality, including habitats, improving soil health, okay? So we're trying to get other regions to do that. I know Scotland are really interested. I've spoken in Wales, and some of you will know I have just become a special advisor to AHDB in England as well. And really what I want to try and do is drive this agenda, is how do we help other farmers to get this really accurate baseline done in their business, okay? When you go on this journey and you get this, the quality of the information, it just is transformational how you look at your own business. And it's about investing in farmers, land managers, decision makers. You are the future. We can't do this journey without you. So we're going to invest in you. We're going to give you really good information about your own farm. And so certainly at the moment, there is no real support if you're just an individual. We need to get this right. And certainly I'm delighted that Northern Ireland is led. I know Scotland are very close behind. I know Wales is looking at. So how do we get England to come with us on this journey too? And I've been vocal about this. I just think this is, this is a public service. It's about delivering multiple public wins. It is in the public's best interest that they help us as farming businesses get that robust baseline and get that multiple public good. So I have been very proactive in that area, and until I'm 6 foot under, I will remain that, even when people shoot me, and I've been shot before. So, that's my vision, and I'm very passionate about it.
Do you think there's a role, John, just going off on a slight tangent, I'm just thinking of how, cluster groups have really taken off in catchment areas and things like that. Do you think there's a role where like you say, there isn't a lot of help for the individual farmer yet? Is there a role, do you see any benefit of grouping together with other farmers and looking at solutions as you have with the ARC project? I mean, I think you could probably speak all day about the value of doing that. Do you think on a geographic level it makes sense, or across?
So what we did in ARCZero, we purposely chose not to do it geographically. We chose different enterprises. Because actually, and one of my dairy farmers in the group, particularly, I mean, he's been part of many discussion groups, and actually said this is, he sees ARCZero as being the most refreshing because he's with an arable farmer, he's with a beef and lamb farmer. I happen to grow willow trees on my farm, so we're all coming and we're sharing, and actually, we're not competitive, we're synergistic, and we're learning of each other. Where I would look at geographical areas is where you're looking to deliver improved water quality and the journey to net zero simultaneously. And the approach we've taken in Northern Ireland, the approach we've taken in ARCZero, is that we can deliver both simultaneously. And the LiDAR technology is not just good at measuring the carbon in your trees and hedges. It's fantastic to show you your runoff risk of your land into water quality. And it astonishes me that actually improving water quality is not higher up in the agenda in England, I have to say. Every week I read in The Guardian or wherever of the Wye or some other river, and someday someone's going to have to put the two together. What we're doing is this one baselining that will deliver on measuring habitats, it will deliver on improving water quality, it will deliver in measuring carbon stocks, and it will deliver in improving soil health and fertility. So there's a collective win for society and productive businesses, all on one journey together.
Thanks, John. You make an excellent point there. When you think about the projects that are happening, they usually either focus on water or biodiversity or soil health, but actually there are very few that are looking at everything Correct. At the same time.
Correct.
Brilliant, thank you. Okay, here might be a slightly controversial question. What role do you think supply chains play in this space, John? What is their responsibility and what should their accountability be?
So, listen, I'll put my cards on the table. As a primary producer, I have consistently been beaten up by supply chains. So if you're talking about what is a lever for behavioral change, if I have a choice of being mandated from the supply chain or being encouraged voluntarily into a scheme that empowers me independently with integrity, I know which one I will pick, okay? So the supply chain do have a role to help pull this through. But they also need to understand talking at farmers will never get the same response as talking with farmers. And I don't believe the supply chain necessarily have got that yet, okay? Is that this is a push, pull, push, pull, push, pull. It is not just a pull, okay? The one thing I'll say about the supply chain, they say a very good story, but are they prepared to pay? When we go on this journey, some of the activities we are going to have to do are going to cost money. In an affordability crisis, If anyone believes that the supply chain are going to pay for the expensive options, I think they need to go and think again. And that's why we actually need to call it out. Where we would like to go in ARCZero after this funding is to see, can we get further funding to look at the moment we've been looking at the win-wins, the things like reducing from synthetic nitrogen going to multi-species swords. That's a win-win. But actually looking at say, methane inhibitors, that's a win-lose. They will reduce methane, but they cost. And nobody yet has put money on the table to say, I'm going to do that. Now, I do recognize Arla and Friesland Campina are now putting money on the table, but most people are not putting money on the table. So my view, the 2030 target is far harder than the 2050 target. And we really do need to focus on what gets the best behavioral change, talking at farmers or talking with farmers. I will argue it is the latter, not the former. So I'm not certain that the supply chain have got that right yet. I want them there. They need to be at the table, but as a partner, not just someone threatening and beating us up.
Thank you.
So there is my prejudice as a primary producer.
No, and I think it's an excellent point. You know, you've kind of got the carrot and the stick approach, and actually it would be brilliant if actually we could persuade farmers on the journey and demonstrate how it makes great business sense for them and building that resilience in. Absolutely. I guess in some cases, you know, and I do see this more and more working in that space of business development where supply chains really are trying to look at how they can help support better through providing that expert advice, perhaps, or things like that. But you're right, there's still a huge amount still to be done there, John. So just talking a little bit more about the standard for carbon measurement. And you mentioned the whole farm carbon balance sheet, which I think probably is somewhere towards creating that standard for carbon measurement. What are your thoughts in that space? Do we need one? And, you know, how far are we away from getting one?
Okay, there's two things. First of all, my whole farm carbon balance sheet is just about a tool. Okay, it's just this issue that you've got assets, you've got liabilities, and you've got a net worth. And every year, farmers sit down with their accountants, and they know what a balance sheet is. Okay, and you know they hope that their net worth increases over time. So it's about finding a communication tool. So it's a communication tool. It's about recognizing they've assets, they've got liabilities, and they've got a net worth, and they want their net worth to get better and eventually get to net zero over time. So it's a communication tool. In regards, do we need standards? Yes, we do. Do we need 40 different standards? No, we don't. And my real frustration is everyone's having an argument about standards and not doing anything. We made a decision in Northern Ireland. We haven't got all the answers, but we said, listen, we'll pick with what we do know. Let's go and do it. Okay. Yeah, we can continuously improve them over time. But you know something, talking about standards forevermore in a day. Rome is burning today. Rome will have burnt by the time we actually bottom it out. I've yet to see, when you put a dozen scientists into a room, will you get one answer? No, you'll get a dozen answers. Trying to get cohesion around it, really difficult. So, you know, for us, and, you know, I'm just back from Brussels too, listening to what they're doing, they will come up at some stage with a single standard. Because you can't compare apples with oranges. You have to compare apples with apples. There's a lot of confusion out there, a lot of different private sector companies offering different standards, different verifications, different reporting systems, and all they're doing is confusing us. I used to be an energy regulator. 25 years ago, I had the privilege of putting the power stations in Northern Ireland into the European Emissions Trading Scheme. And if anyone is old enough as me to remember that, we actually had a wild west of private sector organizations at that time too. And the European Commission put a red line through them and said, one scheme, one framework, that's how we do it. And I think ultimately we're going to have to do that too. My main reason for saying that is the disparity in the carbon prices out there is, you know, from £70 to £15, is that the market is discounting what we're doing because we don't have integrity in our journey. And the only way you get integrity is to have one framework, do it all the same, so the market understands what we're doing, and we're not poor sellers. So ultimately, I believe that is the way we have to go. I know that is not what people out there want, but I do think we need to go that way. And that will be fundamental to get the carbon price to rise to what is a sensible price, and one that will actually drive positive behavioral change that delivers economic wins and net zero at the same time.
Thank you, John. I think that would be an excellent point to stop there. We could talk about this all day, and it's fascinating, but I'm conscious that I want to give the audience chance to, we've got lots of questions I can see streaming in, so I want to give the audience chance to ask a question or have their say. So thank you so much. I'm going to pass over to Will now. Will, do you want to walk us through those questions?
Yes, thank you very much. And thanks very much, John. It's been really enthralling listening to you, and you're a great spokesperson for this area and the industry. And we have got a lot of questions, so I'll try and whiz through a few, and any we don't answer, we'll try and pass them on. But the first being, what would you say to the 20%-ish of farmers who feel as though they probably don't need to do anything about emissions? I think this is coming from a recent DEFRA survey that 18%-ish of farmers feel like they don't need to do anything. What would you say to them?
Well, I would actually like to dig a little bit deeper why they think they don't need to do anything. And so I'm always just a bit skeptical when I see, surveys and stats like that. My view on this is, you have two choices on this journey. You either do something voluntary, put your best foot forward and take control of the agenda, or you're brought in 10 years later, kicking and screaming on someone else's agenda where you're paying the cost for it. And I've seen so many times, rightly or wrongly, back in 1998, I was the founder author of the voluntary initiative on pesticides. I then passed that on, but we were about to be taxed. And it was about us taking the forward foot and actually going out there, being a thought leader and putting our house in order rather than having something forced upon us. In this journey to net zero, I do think we have to go on it. Not everyone has to get to net zero. I'm very clear on that. The average of the industry has to get there. And so for me, you have two choices. You either go voluntary, do what is right for your business and take control of your own narrative, or be forced to do it at some stage. What I don't want is us to end up like the Netherlands, where they are compulsory purchasing farmers, 3,000 farms bought up in the last 6 months, and farmers being put off their land. And that is going on in the Netherlands. I'm watching with close interest what's going to happen in Dublin. They've put a 25% reduction, legally binding target by 2030. I have no idea how they're going to do that on methane, none whatsoever. And they will end up, as it's legally binding, they will end up putting a mandate of a cull. Now, if you're milking 500 dairy cows and you're suddenly told you have to get rid of 20% of them, hey, that screws your fixed costs. So I would much prefer to be forearmed, have my own journey laid out for me, and therefore be able to control my own destiny. So in that situation, if someone's going to mandate a cull on me, I'm saying, no, I'm not doing it. I have already reduced my greenhouse gas emissions by 25%, and here is my data. And I would love my day in court.
No, that's a good answer. And the notes on not every farm needs to be net zero. It is used interchangeably, net zero, and it can be a whole industry as well as a farm, and that really is important for a lot of farmers out there, especially. Great. We've probably got time for two more, and there are two around the carbon calculators. One on AgriCalc. In that it's a technicality of how did you persuade AgriCalc to accept 30-plus-year-old hedges to count towards the carbon balance. So I guess that's leading from one, the technicalities within AgriCalc and whether it works for farmers in a fair way, and maybe how much is it taking into account everything, all assets on a farm, as well as how much support did you get from AgriCalc too?
Okay, so let's declare my conflict of interest. I am a former director of SRUC, and I secured the funding to create AgriCalc in the first place. So there is my conflict of interest. Can I just say, on life cycle assessment calculators, there are, what, 60 of them out there at the moment? You pick your own, but I will argue there are 5 questions you need to challenge. One is it independent? I am not using a calculator who then wants to buy my carbon credits afterwards. There's no independence or transparency in that. Second of all, is it accredited? There is a proper past 2050 standard. There's a ISO standard as well. Is it accredited? Thirdly, does it understand methane and nitrous oxide? Because some of them out there are glorified CO2 only calculators. Fourthly, does it understand GWP star? And fifthly, does it understand, is there a science-based organization behind it? Because we're on a journey. And as our knowledge gets better, we need the calculators to get better. They're going to go from tier 1 to tier 2 to tier 3. Most calculators are on tier 2 for emissions. Any that are doing land-based are predominantly on tier 1 for segregation. So what we did on ARCZero is we accepted what AgriCalc gave us with our tier 1 calculator. We explained to them our baselining, and that we would be baselining again in 5 years' time, and that we would help them get to tier 3 in carbon segregation. I will also suggest on this that watch very closely what Brussels are about to announce next month. There will be an ambition to take carbon segregation to tier 3 in all member states. Now, we're not a member state. We will be playing the hind fiddle on this one, and by a time frame that's really tight. So there's an absolute ambition to go this way. So I accept the limitations of the calculators today, but we've picked a partner who is going to go on a journey with us, and we will help them we will furnish them with our robust data to actually get their module more refined and get it accredited, so we ultimately get to tier 3 carbon segregation factors.
Thank you very much. I think we'll have to leave it there because of time, and leave it on that note of, you know, watch this space.
Well, can I just say, I did notice there was one question about LiDAR. One of the things I want to say about LiDAR is there's a lot of LiDAR in England, but it's only done at 1 scan per square meter. To do this right, you need to do 15 scans per square meter if at all. We've actually done 40 scans per square meter. Okay. And the reason LiDAR is better than satellite will give you 1 scan per 10 square meters. Most of the LiDAR that was initially done by DEFRA was 1 scan per square meter. But if you want to really look at your 3D image of your landscape under trees and whatever, you really need to get to 15 points, preferably 40 points. The big survey in Northern Ireland is being done at 15 points per square meter. The detail, the resolution is stunning. And if you repeat it every 5 years, you can measure the change. And that is where you work out the additionality or not.
It sounds exciting. And yeah, I would be watching very closely at the work in Northern Ireland and in the EU by the sounds of it. But yeah, overall, I think this whole conversation really does hone in on the complexities, but also the importance and how much this is evolving at such a fast pace. So thank you very much, John. It's been really interesting, and thank you everyone for your lots of questions. We'll try and get them answered for you.